One of the most prominent Jeffrey Epstein accusers telling her story in her own words months after her death. Virginia Roberts Giuffre and her memoir, Nobody's Girl.
Virginia Giuffre's full posthumous memoir, obtained by the BBC in a London bookshop this weekend, describes how she felt she might die a sex slave at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and his circle.
I was recruited at a very young age from Mar-a-Lago and entrapped in a world that I didn't understand, and I've been fighting that very world to this day.
If the tragedy of Jeffrey Epstein's sex ring had a face, it might have been this woman.
And I've been fighting that very world to this day, and I won't stop fighting. I will never be silenced until these people are brought to justice.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. This is the cover of Virginia's book. Visually, I feel it communicates quite strongly the way the glare of publicity surrounding this sordid tale has extinguished her, quite literally, but also how her explosive allegations still seem to have a certain degree of censorship surrounding them. One of my first thoughts in terms of the title, Nobody's Girl, was I couldn't help thinking, Nobody's Girl? But isn't the story about the notion that she was everyone's girl? And to her credit, Virginia addresses this assumption in her own narrative, in her own words. She writes, reflecting on the title of the 400-page biography, she explains that she had been everyone's girl and yet nobody's girl. Giuffre consequently chose Nobody's Girl as the title of the book, a melancholic reference to French author Hector Malot's novel of the same name about an orphan adopted by a rich grandfather figure. Virginia describes her early life and experiences in her book, making her the perfect victim for Epstein. In this analysis, I want to focus on Virginia, on that early life, on those formative years, on her words and her story, on the person she was and the journey she went on, and also, more recently, why she's no longer with us. I feel as an author myself, I can reveal the angst, the darkness that writing books takes one through. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind the very first book I wrote and basically how my journey began in true crime was basically asking a very simple question. What is her story? And that was in terms of the murder victim in the Oscar Pistorius case. What was Reeva's story? Because we kept hearing everything from Oscar's point of view, and the media doted on his every word, and you just got so much publicity from that side. And so I kept asking, what is her story? And it turned out that no one was really going to tell it. Her parents sort of didn't really share what they felt with the media, and so eventually I took it upon myself to tell her story, but not... I didn't want to put words in her mouth. I wanted her to tell her story in her own words, even though she was dead. And so I endeavored to do that by using her Facebook narrative, all her social media posts, and let those words stand for themselves. And that led to the book Reeva in her own words. And so I feel a very strong sense of analogy to that whole thing where, again, I want to tell her story, Virginia's story, in her own words. Thank you very much to Barbara Calderwood in Australia for your generous contribution. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, sensitive, important, meaningful, please do consider hitting the thanks button, and let's get started. Early years. Giuffre grew up in the down-at-heel town of Loxahatchee, Florida, as the middle child and the only daughter of Mother Lynn and Father Sky Roberts. While her early childhood, marked by a poverty that verged on neglect, had been far from idyllic, it was fairly ordinary. I do think one aspect that lured her into the life she ended up living was that she wanted to escape the tedium, the boredom, and also the despair of where she came from. Unfortunately, in doing so, she basically escaped one cage for another. According to the Times, in her pre-teen and early teenage years, Giuffre had come to see her value only in what her body could offer, having casual sex with any boy who so much as asked. What we learn from this is that the antidote to going down this road is self-esteem, that parents can imbue their children with a sense of worth, and if not, the individual must endeavor to do so themselves. When a woman doesn't develop the self-worth beyond what they have to offer physically, then the temptation is to develop the self-worth only through physical means, and we know where that road leads.
You know that road. You know exactly where it ends. And I know that's not where you want to be.
Virginia recalls lying on her bed one night and thinking of a quote from one of her favorite children's books, Charlotte's Web. A lamb tells Wilbur that pigs mean less than nothing to her. Wilbur is outraged and argues there is no such thing. Giuffre says she tried to remember a time when I'd been more than nothing. If the glue that ties a young person to their family isn't there, or to any person isn't there, they become unstuck. And it appears for Virginia, the saying that it takes a village to raise a child simply doesn't apply. If anything, Virginia was taken to another village where she was raised by twisted tricksters and manipulative hedonists. According to the Times, home life had become so intolerable that Giuffre would run away frequently. Aged 13 and living on the street, she fell into the clutches of Ron Eppinger, a local P in his mid-60s. For 6 months, Eppinger held her prisoner and sent her to be raped by his various acquaintances. In a deposition given this July, Maxwell named Eppinger. She described him as Giuffre's pimp from when she was 14 or 15. Eppinger was imprisoned for smuggling immigrants into the U.S. for the purpose of prostitution, and Giuffre was rescued by an FBI SWAT team. Now, you would imagine that would have been, could have been, or should have been where the story ended. But the idea that her worth was tied to her appearance and her body, and only that, persisted.
You know that road. You know exactly where it ends.
In the movie The Matrix, Neo closes the door, but in this story, Giuffre steps out and walks down that road, and she makes that decision repeatedly. So when she was faced with the inevitable question the next time, and the time after that, and the time after that, instead of learning from the first foray, the second time the bad decision only got easier and easier from there. Because in her head, in her heart, where she was running from, what she was running from was even worse. Recalling being a high school dropout living in a trailer in her parents' backyard, Giuffre writes, I thought I had nowhere to go but up. What happened next then seemed like a gift. And what happened next started 25 years ago in the summer of 2000. Her father, then a maintenance man at Mar-a-Lago and Spa in Palm Beach, got her a job there as a $9 an hour locker room attendant. A week later, while reading a book about massage, in walked a woman in her 30s with smart manicured nails and a clipped British accent, who promptly introduced herself. I've always thought the fact that a woman recruited Virginia is one of the most horrible aspects of this case, that a woman was the one to so successfully not just ruin, but destroy the life of another woman. Maxwell asked if Giuffre would be interested in earning money on the side, massaging her friend, a wealthy man and long-time member of Mar-a-Lago. Do you see how subtle it is? Because that's how it starts, slowly, gradually, subtly, and apparently harmlessly. And after a baptism of fire in the streets doing Eppinger's bidding, this was going to be easy. That same evening, the book alleges her dad drove her, she was still 16 and without a license, to Epstein's house, a palatial pink-wash mansion at the end of a dead-end road. Pretty incredible. I don't know if it's fair to say they were enablers, if they knew or didn't know what was happening, but it's crazy that she alleges here that her own father basically drove her to Epstein's place. And did he really not know what work she was doing at Mar-a-Lago and what she would be doing that day?
What did you think was going to happen?
And guess who was at the door when Virginia got there? Maxwell greeted Giuffre and led her to a room where Epstein was waiting. Giuffre recalled her first impression of Epstein's bushy eyebrows and Cheshire cat grin. He peppered her with intimate questions like whether she had a boyfriend or took birth control. She was taken aback by the grandeur of his home, its many butlers, gardeners, chefs and servants. And get this, Epstein's mansion in Palm Beach was just 16 miles from Lokahatchee, but the vast economic divide made it seem much further, she writes. You need to learn how rich people do things, she thought to herself as she rubbed Epstein's thighs. Although it's true that elements of her story included voluntary behavior, coercion was naturally part and parcel of it too. When she inevitably became uncomfortable with the escalating nature of what was happening, what caused her to stay put and play ball? She alleges Epstein threatened to hurt her younger brother if she ever told anyone of her life with him. Her obedience and total loyalty were rewarded. She started getting invited to attend glamorous events with Epstein and Maxwell, such as Naomi Campbell's 31st birthday party on a yacht in Saint-Tropez. And this photo gives one an idea of just how young Virginia was when all of this was going on, and also how much older her companions were. This was the new village raising this child, a revolving door of intoxicated strangers flashing by in a dazzle of endless parties and twisted revelries. If this got exhausting or even scary, bad memories of home kept her where she was. Giuffre ultimately took her own life at the family's ranch in rural Perth in April this year, aged 41. Virginia didn't write her book by herself. She had the assistance of Amy Wallace. It's ironic how self-fulfilling the title of her book turned out to be. She clearly was still struggling with the notion of being a nobody when she died. So why did this happen at the moment of basically her triumph? It's quite a heroic thing to do, and a courageous thing to do, to write the book that she wrote and to actually succeed in getting it out there. And so why did her journey end after she did this? Well, as a writer of many books myself, I know how long one can suffer and stew in dark pastures, and how that radioactive stuff can really start to infect you and hurt you and reopen old wounds. I must say I'm sad Virginia's co-author couldn't have perhaps managed the situation better. Didn't she notice Virginia spiraling downwards? Writing a book can be very tough because your exposure to these radioactive subjects tends to be longer than anywhere else. You don't just brush with certain themes, you're forced to marinate in them again and again as part of the editing and re-editing. This can be a surprising aspect, just the trauma of revisiting a particular subject as a mental traveler. With Virginia, I guess it opened, as I say, old wounds that had clearly barely healed to begin with. And these weren't just mere bruises and cuts, these were serious wounds and deep wounds. We've only dealt with the early dimension of Julia's story. Another aspect is when and how she managed to break away, to escape from Epstein and his reaction to her running away. Does anyone want to hear that part of the story? I want to end this analysis with this. One of Virginia's last expressed wishes was that her memoir be released. It is my heartfelt wish that this work be published, regardless of circumstances at the time. She wrote that in an email foreshadowing her death 3 weeks later. It is imperative that the truth is understood and that the issues surrounding this topic be addressed, both for the sake of awareness and for justice. And stories like Virginia's require awareness for there to be justice. It's a victory for her that her book came out at all, and dominoes have already begun to fall, but I think much of the picture still remains hidden.
In order to honor a soldier like Karen Walden, we have to tell the truth, General, about what happened over there. The whole, hard, cold truth. And until we do that, we dishonor